to begin this conversation.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. This is very exciting for me. Particularly this first film, Grand Hotel, 1932. But as you know, we'll have 5 films, and we'll be going through history. A couple of films from the 40s, and then also from the 1960s. And it's always interesting to see how the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences appreciates films, votes for films, what wins, what doesn't win. In 1932, this was the 4th Academy Awards. So this was a new tradition that had just started. There weren't a whole lot of members at the time, probably a few hundred, and they all worked at studios, and they probably voted very much along the studio lines. And in fact, even, I was fortunate enough to become a member of the Academy back in 1995. And at that time, there were only 5,000 members. So it's always been a fairly select kind of audience that makes these decisions. And the decision, of course, to give the Best Picture this year to 1932, The Grand Hotel, was not a complicated decision, I don't think, because it still, to me, is such an extraordinary movie. But what's quite remarkable is that it received no other nominations at all. That was its only nomination. And that's never happened again in the history of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. And I don't know why these actors, and certainly the sets and the photography, were not nominated. But it's sort of a strange little quirk about this movie. And possibly it has to do with this sort of ensemble nature where you had 5 movie stars, in a movie together. That had never happened before. No one had ever thought of that kind of approach to, putting together a film. You usually had 2 stars and maybe a supporting actor. So it's possible that because there were 5 and therefore there wasn't as much screen time, or really wasn't about just one character, maybe that could have impacted their voting, but I don't know. But anyhow, so much to talk about here, because again, this movie really, to me, not just is a great film, but it really celebrated what was great about the Hollywood studio system. And I know you've heard me, mention this before, but at this period of time, 1932, now remember, sound had only started in 1929, with the Jazz Singer, with Warner Brothers. So there's only 3 years of sound movies even being made when this film came out. But of course, before then, there was a huge tradition of silent film and very, very successful silent film industry. So by this point, Hollywood was sort of rolling along, and also now getting into this whole new world of sound and what that would mean. So, what we see here is a studio system, MGM, which was the largest of the studios. And you have to remember that all of these people are under contract. So all of the actors had contracts with MGM, the art director, the costume designer. These people all worked for MGM. So they were told what film to be in and when to show up. And what it meant was you were able to put together these fabulous projects without having to, worry about availability, or, if someone liked the script or not liked the script. I mean, that mattered a little bit, but, it really was incredible. And so the producer of the film, Irving Thalberg, who was, one of the greatest producers in the history of motion picture, really was able to control all of these aspects of the film. So we'll go through some more of the details of how this all worked, but it's something that there just is nothing like this today. Nothing like this exists. and never probably will, but it certainly was something that really made for enormous success for many, many years. And it allowed actors to do 4 or 5 movies a year and directors to do 3 movies a year. The directors, by the way, didn't usually have much to do in post-production. The editorial was all done by the producer in the studio. So they could go on to the next film. So it really allowed for an enormously successful and productive time in the film industry. And also, of course, as you know, this was really sort of in the height of the Depression. And during the Depression, film going actually skyrocketed. It was one of the most popular times for films because relative to everything else, they were very cheap. They still only cost, 10 cents or whatever it was at the time. And in fact, in 1935, I happen to know this, but when the Westdale Theater was built, 60% of Canadians went to the movies once a week, right? Because, where was the competition? A little bit of radio, TV didn't exist. So, it's just a whole nother world, and a world I wish I perhaps would have had a chance to be part of at times. But anyhow, we get to enjoy the films. They still exist. And we're going to talk a little bit about Grand Hotel. Now, the dialogue to me is so spectacular. I mean, there's so many spectacular things, but there's a couple of lines here that really stood out. Of course, particularly from Lionel Barrymore, who played Kringlen. Life is wonderful, but it's very dangerous. If you have the courage to live it, it's marvelous. And then, of course, his fantastic line when he's arguing with Wallace Beery, you don't kill someone over a pocketbook. And then, of course, we have the doctor who both starts the movie and ends the movie. At the start of the film, people coming, going, nothing ever happens. At the end, the Grand Hotel, always the same. People come, people go, nothing ever happens. Very ironic, but also very much the theme of the film. And then, of course, one of the most famous lines of dialogue in the history of motion pictures, Greta Garbo, I want to be alone. And she says it twice. And this, of course, wasn't just true for her character in the film. This was very much true of her as a personality. She was an actress who absolutely wanted to have nothing to do with the public. She didn't even attend the premiere of Grand Hotel. And we'll talk a little bit about Garbo, but this movie really, to me, was her film more than anyone else's. And watching it this time, after many years, I probably haven't seen it for 10 years or 15 years, I really just was so overwhelmed by her performance. Well, what is this film really about? So, I mean, to me, it's a celebration of life, right? That, life sucks sometimes. There's death, there's hopelessness, but you can persevere and look and find strength during very trying moments, right? And then, of course, the constellation of the star players, but also the acting. I mean, the sets. It's what we call screen deco, and this was really the beginning of Art Deco in terms of an art form. And then there's sort of this glamour, that envelops the story and its characters. And it doesn't really get in the way either because there's such a riveting plot, but the whole presentation, all of the aesthetics of it, how it all came together to me is just beautiful. So really, when you think of what is a hotel, the constantly revolving door, the portrayal of life as something continually in motion, moving forward, regardless of any situation. One leaves, a new customer checks in, one dies, another's born, one's hopes are crushed, another's dreams come true. The ups and downs we witness in this hotel is true to life, right? So I think that, is inspirational. It inspires us to have the courage to continue to appreciate new beginnings. And one of the things that it did as well, of course, was this idea of following the lives and activities of multiple characters. Now, this had never been done in Hollywood. Hollywood films usually had 2 stars, and both for financial reasons, but also because there was just this assumption that that's the kind of plot and story that people wanted. So for this film, of course, they took 5 major movie stars and put them in this film. And this ensemble cast actually created a new movie formula, which, we see duplicated all the time, including in modern times with, Ocean's 11 or, any of these movies where they put together, how many great stars could be in the cast together. And in fact, it was so successful, by the way, this film was the most successful commercial film of the year, as well as winning Best Picture, that the following year, MGM made a film called Dinner at 8, which was a comedy, but took the same model where they filled it up with fantastic movie stars, including 1 or 2 who were in this film as well. So it really creates a very engrossing experience, I believe, because of course you do get engaged, even with the short amount of screen time some of these characters have, with all 5 of them. And then of course how they interweave their storylines is always fascinating. One thing we should mention about this film, though, is that this was at the period where the production code was first being evolved, because censorship with the movie industry was a very, very challenging problem. It actually been decided by the US government that films did not qualify under the First Amendment of freedom of speech, that they could be censored. They couldn't just say whatever they wanted. They were very worried that films were having a negative impact, particularly on the youth, because they would portray homosexuality or violence or, many of the things you hear people criticizing aspects of television and now, of course, aspects of the internet. That was a very big issue because some of the silent films, the pre-code films, were incredibly racy and very adult and very sophisticated. And it's kind of remarkable when you watch them now. But remember, that was sort of the roaring 20s, where everything, was very liberal and people were really pushing the envelope all the time. So what was particularly interesting and how it affected this film was the role of Joan Crawford, right, who played Flemschen, right, the young stenographer. So this role, and a stenographer who, as there was some line about, would you like me to give you some dictation, or, willing to have affairs with these various men or do whatever. There was great concern about this, that it would be too provocative and racy. And in fact, Joan Crawford at first was concerned about doing the role because of this. But at the time, the code was just starting in 1932. It really came on strong in 1934. So what happened is a lot of the different states would have their own censorship rules. So what they were finding out was that people were cutting sections of the film out before it was shown at the theater in wherever city it was. And that was an awful thing to happen. So the Hollywood community decided that they would create their own pre-code, this own production code, rather than having the government superimpose something on them. And in fact, Irving Thalberg, who was the producer of this film, and as I mentioned, the great leader of MGM under Louis B. Mayer, was one of the people who participated in creating the production code, because they thought it would be better for them to put this on there than have it added by a third party. So once there was a production code, people would actually submit their scripts before they even shot them, because then they would be told what changes to make, et cetera, instead of having to make films and then later on have to tear them apart because things wouldn't be approved. So it's all, kind of an interesting element to what was going on at this period in Hollywood. And in fact, it finally ended. In fact, the production code really lasted up until the 60s. And it was really only in the mid 60s that it really started to fade away. And it was replaced by a rating system, right? And in the States, it was, G and M and R and then X. And in fact, to bookend this series, we're going to be showing you 1969 Midnight Cowboy, which was an X-rated movie. In fact, it's the only X-rated movie that ever won a Best Picture Academy Award. So we'll be talking about this whole issue of censorship and everything else later on. So now, where did this all begin? Of course, it all began in Berlin. It began with a novel, written by, actually, she was an Austrian woman who lived in Berlin named Vicky Baum. Menschen im Hotel means people in a hotel. And it was actually based on a true story regarding a scandal at a hotel with a stenographer and an industrial magnate. And Baum had actually worked as a maid in two Berlin hotels, and her story following the lives of multiple characters and a lot of the details of the storylines were actually very accurate and based on real experiences. And so this was a novel first, and then of course it became a play in Germany, and it was a very successful play in Germany as well. And then MGM found out about it, Thalberg, and he purchased both the stage and film rights to the novel for $35,000, not a lot of money. But what he decided to do was first have it staged as a play in New York City on Broadway before they made a movie out of it. And the play was a spectacular hit on Broadway. So by the time they recouped all their investment before they even started the film. So when they went to start to photograph the movie, December of 1931, soon after the stage play closed, there was an enormous amount of publicity even before they went into production, because everyone knew about this great project. Everyone knew about, and everybody knew, of course, these great stars who were going to be in it. So people were following the casting of what was going to happen very closely. And of course, there was a lot of controversy, as usual, about casting. People like Clark Gable were considered, but too young. Buster Keaton in the Lionel Barrymore role. Norma Shearer in Joan Crawford's role. Norma Shearer was a huge star at MGM, and in fact, married to Irving Thalberg. But this was sort of great fodder for the film magazines, but everybody knew something incredibly special was going to happen here. So, again, we talked about this idea of the first all-star film, and this, after its success, continued on and on. And again, this tribute to Irving Thalberg. Just a little bit about Thalberg. He was made the head of production of MGM in 1925 at the age of 26. And he only worked there for 12 years. He died very early death at the age of 37. But during this time, he produced 400 movies that were really his imprint, and innovations were included. And he was at, story conferences, sneak previews, ordered extensive reshooting. He introduced horror films. He really, more than any one individual, really created the Hollywood classic studio movie as we know it. And one of his most brilliant things was he was able to synthesize and merge the world of stage drama and literary classics with Hollywood films, because he brought that kind of artistic class to this whole world that wasn't necessarily as prevalent during the silent film. His other great genius was creating movie stars. And he would groom them, he would develop them, he would decide what films to put them in. Some of them included Lon Chaney, Ramon Navarro, John Gilbert, Joan Crawford, Clark Gable, Jean Harlow, Wallace Beery, Greta Garbo, of course, Lionel Barrymore, Norma Shearer. It's absolutely amazing because, you know, most of these actors, many of these actors were not stage actors, and he really understood how to create them as personalities and as stars. And that really, you know, I think more than anything is what drove the success. And in fact, you know, when he died, Franklin Roosevelt wrote, the world of art is poorer with the passing of Irving Thalberg. His high ideals, insights, and imagination went into the production of his masterpieces. In fact, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts created the Irving Thalberg Memorial Award, which they give not every year, but they give as a life achievement award to you know, someone whose work, usually a producer. The director was Edmund Goulding. Edmund Goulding was actually English, had been working in the silent film business in Hollywood. He was a writer, of course. He first started as a writer. He did lots of different things. He was a brilliant guy and was involved in makeup and costumes and styling and not necessarily the best with camera, but he really worked very hard, and he was most known for his ability to deal with difficult actors. So that was another reason why they were very excited to get him onto this film, because they knew it would be very challenging to have these 5 great stars all together. But some of his other great movies, and he did everything. He did comedies, he did war movies, Dawn Patrol, wonderful movie if you've never seen that. Relationships movie, The Devil's Holiday. And then he, in fact, also did a great film noir movie called Nightmare Alley with Tyrone Power that's actually being remade right now by Guillermo del Toro with Bradley Cooper. So let's talk a little bit about the cast. And the cast, we have to start, of course, with Garbo. So for those who you don't know about her, she was born in Stockholm, very, very poor family. Her name actually was Greta Garbo. This was a situation where they actually didn't create a different name, and she used her actual name. But she had to drop out of school at 14. She tried to do some modeling. She wound up in a little film by the time she was 15 or 16. And Louis B. Mayer, the head of MGM, was in Europe because this was a period when they were starting to, you know, in the mid-20s, they were looking for Europe, the German film industry especially, to bring some great talent over to make films in Hollywood. Of course, the films were all silent at that point, so speaking English wasn't absolutely a necessity. And he actually went to see this German film because he was interested in the director. But once he saw it, it was called The Atonement of Gösta Berling. He saw Greta Garbo, and he just believed that there was something in the eyes of this performer that she was going to be a star. And she made a deal with him, $400 a week. She signed her first contract. So you can imagine now she's 19 years old, maybe, comes to America, speaks no English, you know, really had not a lot of training as an actress, but she had just that ephemeral quality, and people knew it. So Thalberg, of course, gave her an intensive makeup. Her hair was changed, her waistline, her, you know, she started to wear stylish clothing. They fixed her teeth, you know. Then they cast her in a film called Torrent. And even as soon as the first rushes came in, it was very clear this would be a big star. And she was the biggest female star of the time. Up until 1930, she was making 2, 3, 4 films a year, hugely successful and a worldwide star. Remember, at this point, silent films were being shown all over the world. And of course, it was very easy because you didn't have to dub them, right? I mean, you had to maybe change some of the titles, you know, inside the film, but it was a very simple process. And Hollywood was becoming a very big international industry. This wasn't something just in America. And the biggest male star at the time was John Garfield. And in fact, Garfield and Garbo made several films together. And again, these were pre-code films. There's one in particular called Flesh and the Devil, which if you haven't seen, you might want to try to see if it's possible to find that. And there was some real romantic chemistry between these two. As the story goes, they were involved in a romantic affair. Many times Garbo wanted, Gilbert wanted to marry Garbo. She kept backing out at the last minute. But certainly one of the great romances of the Golden Age. And unfortunately, as the sound area began, Gilbert's career did not continue. Many of these silent actors had trouble with sound film, as you might, remember when we watched that great musical about the silent film age. Its name is escaping me. But Garbo also, and this is again the beauty of the system, was that in that film Torrent, the cinematographer was William Daniels. So William Daniels was also under contract to Fuchs. So it was always arranged that Daniels would be the cinematographer most of her films that she did at MGM. And of course, William Daniels was the photographer of the Grand Hotel. So when they went to make this film, Garbo really wanted John Gilbert to play against her. But unfortunately, again, the studio did not think he was going to do it and do it well. So instead, they cast John Barrymore. And John Barrymore was an extraordinary actor. He was one of the greatest stage actors of his time. In fact, when Barrymore played Hamlet in England, the English, here's an American coming to do Shakespeare, were so blown away by him. He was considered, one of the greatest Hamlets ever. And Garbo was intrigued by doing this film with Barrymore. Barrymore, of course, was 50 years old, and Garbo was probably only around 26 or 27. And as I'm sure you noticed in the film, the age difference sometimes seems a little odd, though I don't know if at that time in history it was considered as odd. But they actually got along quite well. And Garbo was not someone who was usually became friendly with her co-actors. And, she really, insisted, wanted to be left alone. But she got so carried away in some of these scenes. In fact, the famous scene where they're kissing, they kept kissing for like three extra minutes, even after the director had yelled cut. And somewhere this bonus kissing footage seems to exist, but we don't know where. Another challenge of the film was having Garbo and Joan Crawford in the same film together, because Garbo was the much more established star. Joan Crawford, they were really about the same age, though no one knows when Joan Crawford was born. She never let anybody know what her real age was. But Crawford was on her way to be a big star there too. But of course, as you notice, there are no scenes. They're actually in together. And in fact, Garbo doesn't interact with any of the other film stars except John Barrymore. So she was reluctant at first to do it too. She, of course, she's playing Russian. She didn't do a Russian accent. She's talking with a Swedish accent. And she thought that would be very strange. But as you notice, nobody speaks with a German accent except for Wallace Beery, tries to do some kind of strange accent as Preacher, as the businessman. I'm not sure what accent he's doing, but he's such a character. He's just having fun, I think, more than anything else. With Barrymore, again, he was from this great family, the great Barrymore family. His parents were famous actors. His uncle was a famous actor, John Drew. His brother, his older brother, of course, Lionel Barrymore, also in this film. Ethel Barrymore was his sister, was a great stage actor, and they were sort of like the Redgraves are in England. They were the great Hollywood acting family, and that continued for another 2 generations. And of course, ultimately with Drew Barrymore, who was John Barrymore's granddaughter. So again, many, many great films John Barrymore was in, and mostly silent. Moving to the talkies, well, of course, he had a great voice. There wasn't a stage-trained voice, so there wasn't any issue about his voice, but he was an alcoholic from the time he was 14 years old. His personal life was always a bit of a mess. So although he did try to continue into sound outside of Grand Hotel and another wonderful film called 20th Century, a screwball comedy with Carole Lombard, he really suffered and was divorced 4 times and bankrupt, and many, unfortunately, tragic stories about him. And of course, his older brother, Lionel Barrymore, in some ways became better known once the talkies began, even than John, because Lionel Barrymore won an Academy Award for Best Actor in 1931 in Free Soul. Of course, he's wonderful in this film. Many of you might remember him from Frank Capra's It's a Wonderful Life, Mr. Potter. In fact, he often played kind of villains or the bad guy. But Lionel Barrymore was there at the beginning. He was working in Biograph Studios, which was the famous studio in New York, where D.W. Griffith was the great director. And he appeared in, it was like, they would just make, 10, 12 movies, because he's wearing full-length features, but he was in 60 silent movies directed by D.W. Griffith, but often these were like 1 reel, 2 reel movies, right? But he also worked with Gloria Swanson. Lionel Barrymore was a remarkable man, though he was also, he really wanted to be an artist, but he was also a director. He ultimately wrote a novel. In fact, one of the films he directed, Madam X, was nominated. He was nominated as Best Director. He's credited as the first director to start to move a microphone on a soundstage. I just think in this movie, he's absolutely incredible. And we'll talk about some of his scenes. The other tragedy for Lionel Barrymore was he had arthritis. He also broke his hip several times. Later in his life, he only did performances in a wheelchair. By the time he did a great film called You Can't Take It With You, which I think he was also nominated for. Louis B. Mayer, who was his great buddy, had bought $400 worth of cocaine for Barrymore just to help him get through his pain every day. So, it's a little bit of tragedy to all these actors. Joan Crawford, we talked about Lucille Lesieux, that was her real name. And she was a dancer and started off, dancing in Detroit. She was originally from Texas. She was in the chorus line. She started off as a body double for Norma Shearer, but she became a very popular film star in the silent film period as well. And then, of course, they had to come up with a name for her. And they actually had a contest in a movie weekly magazine to what should be her new stage name. And at first, the first prize was going to be Joan Arden. And then it turned out there was someone else named Joan Arden. So they came up with Crawford. And she never really liked the name very much. But it's just amusing how these names emerged. And as I said, they didn't really like each other very much. And so fortunately, they weren't in a scene together. But Joan Crawford and Garbo certainly didn't have a very, they were always trying to upstage each other a bit. And in fact, after the entire film was shot, Thalberg thought Joan Crawford's performance was so fabulous, he was worried that she would upstage Garbo in the film. So they actually had to go back and shoot some additional moments with Garbo and with Barrymore and try to do a little bit more to make her, of course, the first build and the biggest star, not get upstaged in the film. Wallace Beery, maybe you don't know him, you might have recognized him, but he was in a huge, huge silent film star and many, many great movies. And quite interesting, he won the Academy Award for Best Actor for a film called The Champ, which was the same year as this film, won Best Picture. So here was a person who was not even nominated for his performance in the Best Picture, winning Best Actor for a different film. But he made over 250 films. And with MGM, he was very smart because he signed the contract right around this time where he would get paid $1 more than any other contract player at the studio. So even though his career started to decline a bit, he was the highest paid film actor in the world during the early 30s. And Beery was obviously very kind of crazy and bigger than life and bombastic and not a particularly nice guy. He had run away from home at 16. He had worked at the Ringling Brothers Circus as an elephant trainer. He loved the circus and would have stayed. He was clawed by a leopard, so he gave up. He was billed fourth in this movie, which he was very upset about, except for the fact that he was the only one who got to play with a German accent. So he thought that would be fun. And of course, he knew he was getting paid just as much money. And in fact, Beery is in Dinner at 8 in 1933, where he plays against Jean Harlow. It's a fact. If you've never seen Dinner at 8, that's a great movie. And of course, John Barrymore's in it and Reed Dressler. Who else? Lewis Stone, who played the doctor. Now, this was a guy who spent 29 years as a contract player with MGM. Very big film star, not even billed barely in this movie. Best known for Judge Hardy and all those great Andy Hardy movies. He was nominated in 29 for The Page. He was in 7 films with Greta Garbo. They really played well together. In fact, the next movie they did after this was called Queen Christine. And, you know, he was with this studio right up until his death. We should talk a little bit about the sets and the wardrobe in this film because they really were revolutionary. The set was designed by Cedric Gibbons. Cedric Gibbons was not only a great art director, he was the head of art direction at the studio, was responsible for many, many, many great movies, regardless of whether he actually was the art director. He supervised all the art directors in all the films. Both his parents were architects. He grew up and studied art. He really understood trends in art. And he was very familiar, of course, with art moderne, which was sort of the precursor to Art Deco. And Art Deco was just becoming popular right around this time. And you could see the influences, the Art Deco influences throughout the set. He also designed motion picture theaters. He was very significant. And these were the movie palaces that they were building at that time. He also designed the Oscar statue. That was his design, if you can believe that. He was nominated 39 times for Best Production Design, and he won 11 Oscars, right? Pretty amazing. And I'm sure you've seen many, many of his movies. Some of the ones you may not realize he did was An American in Paris, The Merry Widow, which is this great von Stroheim movies, so many incredible movies. And then, of course, the wardrobe was equally spectacular in this film, and that was done by a man named Adrian. And Adrian, like Gibbons, was under contract at MGM and was, really involved in most of their great movies. He's probably most famous for his costumes for The Wizard of Oz. But between 1928 and 41, and often you'd see his credit as gowns by Adrian, right? And in fact, Adrian's gowns and wardrobe had a huge effect on fashion, which is not surprising. I think that's still true today. And if you think about things like Joan Crawford's, broad shoulder jackets that she used to wear, that was an Adrian creation. And of course, all the spectacular clothes that Garbo wore, but he would do hats and different things that really became hugely emphasized all through fashion. And he worked with, of course, all of the greatest actresses because he was at MGM. In fact, his evening gown designs were so brilliant that they shot a black and white film called The Women, which was another star-studded, multi-star affair. And to open the film, even though it was filmed in black and white, the women had a fashion show in color just to show Adrian's designs. And one other strange thing, of course, he was married for 40 years to Janet Gaynor, the great actress who was the first woman ever to win an Academy Award for Sunrise. And of course, they both were gay or heterosexual, and the marriage may have been of a cover, but it lasted a long time. So think about the hotel lobby set, obviously deco design. But what's absolutely extraordinary about it is that up until this time, because of the limitations of sound, most sets were designed in a proscenium style, right? So there might be 3 sides to a set, but you were shooting into the set, you know, with the cameras and the lighting coming from sort of where the 4th wall was. But this hotel lobby had 4 walls. It was built, and you can certainly see, because of course those shots with that incredible front desk, that circular front desk, right, sitting in the middle of it, the incredible black and white tile floor. It's just an amazing set, the winding staircase. And they had to design it in such a way, of course, that it would come apart and put back together again. But it really allows you to, you know, just follow this, you know, and with these big, you know, obviously complicated crane shots and of course, trying to capture the sound with, you know, with these different boom mics was very challenging, but it makes magnificent scenes. And one small, that great black and white tile floor, of course, was incredibly noisy, right? So what they had to do was all of the actors and extras, when they weren't literally going to be seeing their feet, they all wore these big, thick woolen socks over their shoes, because otherwise their footsteps would have destroyed all of the sound. They were also incredibly detailed about all of the hotel rules and what people, if you notice, the switchboard workers all had to wear their hair in braids wound in a cornet fashion in order for the headphones to fit in snugly. And so all this incredible research about handlebar mustaches. But of course, in the Grand Hotel, they all had to be clean shaven, very strange kind of, but everything was done, you know, to the nth degree, researched, really trying to bring alive this Berlin German setting. So many small details. I don't really have time to go into them all, but I did think that story of the socks was great. William Daniels, the cinematographer, he started as a top cinematographer. He was 19 years old, and he was discovered by Erich von Stroheim, no less, and shot several of Stroheim's greatest films, including Greed in 1924, one of the greatest films ever made, and Merry Widow. And then, of course, he shot Torrent in 1926, which was Greta Garbo's first film. And after that, they worked together constantly, Flesh and the Devil, and all of these different movies. And he continued shooting for many, many years. The editorial, of course, which was mostly supervised by Thalberg, was very different done in those days, because Gould handled the shooting in a very extraordinary way. And, you know, mostly films are not shot in sequence, right? They'll just go to a set, shoot all the scenes in that sequence, et cetera, et cetera. But because Goulding had so much time to prepare this, he actually shot this pretty much in a chronological order. And that made a huge difference in order for the performers, of course, more than anything else. But it also kind of allowed everybody to have some really great experiences. Of course, because remember, they were on contract. So normally you would take an actor, you'd shoot all the scenes that he was needed for, you'd tell him to, you know, leave, he could go home. But here they were, you know, Garbo would come for 2 days, not show up for 2 more weeks, come for 3 days. They could do whatever they wanted, right? So that really was inspired to do, and just amazing scenes. And of course, when we go through some of the slides, we can talk about some of the specifics of how they created them. some of the images which were done with process photography and everything else. But why don't we go to the slides? Jeffrey, are we ready to start looking? And again, please, any questions, comments? So curious if you've never seen this film, did it stand up? Did it still work for you? But anyhow, we'll be talking about that in a minute. So here we have perhaps the opening shot and of the Grand Hotel. Of course, everything was built on the sound stages, even the exteriors with the cars, all done on the sound stage. We can see the very heavy Deco influence here. And of course, as I said, Deco was relatively new at that point, but enhanced its popularity, and I think it continued to grow over time. The next slide. So very much at the opening, of course, here we see our doctor. Here we see the incredible depth of the clothing, the brilliant way they created different layers with elevations, the lighting sconces. It's just amazing. And of course, his famous lines about nothing ever happens. And of course, the doctor, we find out a little bit about, was in World War I, had, obviously was injured, had some traumatic experiences, very rich side characters throughout the film. Look at that, look at the lighting fixture on the table. That's amazing. Next slide, please. Yeah, isn't that great? So here we really see the set. We see this amazing, front desk with its circle, the incredible floor. Now, this was probably some kind of a process shot, was it not, Jeff? Do you know? So it was a forced perspective, and they probably added the foreground element. Was it could have been a miniature, could have been a matte painting. I don't really know. Do you?
I don't know whether it's a matte painting, but
yeah, obviously this was not a realistic shot. It was a composite of sorts. Next one. Oh yeah, I thought this would be fun. Here's a shot of them shooting the Grand Hotel. So look at the crane. This is the way, the cameras and those sweeping shots were created. Obviously, other times it would sit on a tripod. You can see the floor. You can see how high these sets were, very, very tall sets, and then how they were lit. The sets are almost at the height of the entire stage, right? And then it would come apart in pieces, right? So, this was a piece where they were now shooting directly in that one direction, and they pulled up the floor, pulled out the walls. But then when they needed, the other kinds of shots, they put everything back together again. And of course, they were master craftsmen, master technicians, and just give you some sense of the number of people and bodies and extras and crew. I can't quite make out. I think there are a couple of our stars there by the bar. That might be Wallace Beery and Joan Crawford. But it really was an incredible time. And I don't know, the work was just extraordinary. It took an incredible number of people to accomplish these things. Next slide. Yeah, so Lionel Barrymore, I just love him in this movie. He's such a wonderful, rich character. And of course, he normally did not play these kinds of roles. He was more of a leading man in his silent film days. And here he's playing almost, sometimes he reminds me almost of Groucho Marx or something, but very funny and a very, very endearing. And I think the ending, of course, with him and Flemschen going off together is just, warms the heart. And, here he has survived it all. Next. Yeah. And then, of course, Joan Crawford. Personally, she's not my favorite actress in Hollywood. And I think I admire her. I just found her always a little odd or off-putting. But I thought she was just fabulous in this role and really brought a lot of sensitivity to the part. And and just dramatically, she was great. And of course, here she is with Barrymore, and they have the most wonderful, fun, flirtatious relationship. And the Baron is, it's just, it makes me smile when I see the two of them together. Next. Yeah, and then of course, Wallace Beery. Yeah, he was not a pleasant guy. They didn't really get along very well either. They were not not suited for each other. And Beery was, considered himself a big movie star, and here he was kind of with fourth billing, and he, it kind of comes out in his performance, which is so belligerent and kind of, he's just, I think it worked in the movie, but I think to me, of all the performances, his felt perhaps the most dated, next. And then, of course, Garbo. So, you have to remember that for the audience, Garbo was a silent film star. And what that meant was their performances were not their dialogue. The performances were their face, and the subtlety and the sophistication of how she could use her eyebrows and her eyes and every aspect, her body language, the way she moved, the way she, it just was, it's a star performance. And of course she's playing this, prima donna, Russian ballet, ballerina, but this was Garbo, and I was so impressed with this film, and because sometimes when I've seen in the past, I say, maybe she's overacting or something, but this is what the audience expected. This is what the audience wanted from her, was this great dramatic kind of quality. And the way you see her transform from the beginning when, she's so tired. And then, of course, when she falls in love or has this sparkle of love with the Baron, and everything just changes, and she becomes this youthful character flitting around and, running through the revolving door. And I just thought she was so marvelous in this. But it is an acting style that we don't see today, because, everything is so dialogue driven these days. Next slide. So I don't remember this scene, Jeffrey. What was this again?
This is the early dictation scene.
Oh, yeah, when they're just meeting. Yeah. I don't know. Anyhow, next scene. Yeah, so this is Barrymore, the Baron, on his way to steal the jewels from, Greta Garbo. And obviously this is a process shot. I think this was done with rear projection. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, he's lying on his stomach.
He's lying on his stomach. So, lots of fun was done. There were several different ways they used trick photography. Sometimes they would double expose the film. But there was, as much technology as existed was all used these days. And of course, in the silent film era, they developed very sophisticated camera tricks and different ways to create illusions. And so although this is, for the most part, fairly traditionally shot, there are a couple of moments like this that I think, were quite fun. Next. Yeah, here's another one as well, right? So again, this is when when Beery's out on the balcony, and I don't know what this is. Is this a matte shot, Jeff? Do you know?
The matte shot. Yep.
Yeah. So the way they would do matte shots is they would actually lock a camera off, and there would be the part of the screen where the actor was that was photographed, and they would put a giant piece of glass in front of the camera, right? And they would literally paint on the glass all the rest of the scene. And they would photograph it in real time. So it really wasn't actually compositing two images together. It was creating one single image at the same time with a giant glass painting and an actor performing in a small portion of the thing. And this technology continued into the 50s. Hitchcock used a lot of matte paintings. And in fact, we even used, probably one of the last times a glass matte painting was done was when we did Dracula in 1992 or whatever it was, because we were trying to emulate all of the old cinematographic techniques. Next shot. Oh, yes. Our poor Garbo, so downtrodden and surrounded by these wonderful characters. but again, it's just all in her face and body language to me. And that, it's just charisma. I don't know what other word you use. She's just magnetic. You can't take your eyes off her. Next slide. Yeah. And of course, the Daniels knew how to light her, what images, what side works the best. Very dramatic shot, of course. Next.
And Fred, just to let the audience know as well, the next series of slides will probably provide a pretty good demonstration of what you're talking about, how she would act with her face, I think.
Yeah. That's right. It's all body language and face and emotion and high emotion. And she often was cast in these characters who were very dramatic in their role in the story. Like,
if I may as well, Fred, to just interject, Goulding also brought a vitrola on the set to allow Garbo to select pieces of classical music to play to really get her into the mood.
And that was always done in the silent film era. They were always playing music to inspire the actors. Next one. Oh yeah, I hope that's coming across on your screen. It's a little dark here, but just incredible control over facial expressions and just, it just, I don't know what to say. She was nominated 3 times for Best Actress, not for this one, but she never actually won a Best Actress award, and I'm not sure why. One of her greatest performances was near the end when she did Ninotchka, which was a comedy that Billy Wilder directed, where she almost played a parody of herself in 1939. And if you haven't seen that film, that is one of Garbo's greatest performances, though very different, of course, than what she was known for. Next, yeah, that's the kind of, but very interesting. He would light her very much from the front. You can see there isn't a lot of key lighting, or from the top. You can see the top lighting on her, but she just had that perfect sculptured face and perfect body, and she never married. She never had children. Some question, whether she was heterosexual. Probably was. Many of the actors at that time were heterosexual, and of course, after she retired, people never really interviewed her, didn't know much about her. She lived in New York City probably up until the 1970s, I think, and people would see her wandering around the streets sometimes. She was very wealthy, but she really just had no interest in interacting with the public, which is very different than almost all the other movie stars at the time. Next. Yeah, so this is what Barrymore, of course, was known for the great profile. That was in fact, that's what was his nickname, the great profile. And in fact, if you notice in the film, very often he shot in profile. And in fact, he's always shot on the left side. This was his better side. Most actors have most human beings have a better side. And Garbo was very accommodating, actually, which she wasn't for anybody else, but she was very accommodating, and she would allow him to be on his good side, for the great profile shots. Next. Yeah, I don't know. A lot of real magnetism between these two in this movie. And I don't know why for this time, sort of the 22-year age difference, sort of, I don't know. I noticed it more this time, but I think, again, for audiences of that period, it was pretty accepted, the older men and younger women. And but there was quite an age difference there. And of course, Barrymore was sort of playing himself, because in a way, that's really where he was in his career. He had lost the glamour of being, one of the top stage actors in the world. He was drowning in alcoholism. He was struggling with a sound career. And so there was a pathos to him as a human being that perhaps helped embody this wonderful performance as the Baron. Next. Again, to me, Lionel Barrymore is so wonderful and so comedic. In fact, one of my favorite sequences we don't have a picture of is after he's very drunk one night, he stumbles into his hotel room. I don't know if you guys remember this scene or not, but it literally goes on for almost 90 seconds where he stumbles around. He finds a mirror, he looks in the mirror, he plays with the mirror, he engages with the furniture, he finds himself at the end falling into bed, falling out of his bed. And again, this was great, silent film comedic stuff, right? I mean, in this film, it suddenly kind of felt to me, oh my God, the movie stopped for 90 seconds to let this guy, pretend he's Harpo Marx or something. But that was very much, a tradition of comedic, entertainment for the audience of the day. And I think everyone would enjoy that little sequence of Lionel Barrymore and, playing the drunk and just having so much fun. Next, please. Yeah, look at that. No, it's the other profile, but I guess there was no way around it with the car. And, and of course, ultimately we never see, Garbo when she arrives at the train station, he's not there, but we can just imagine the tragedy of that moment for her. And next, please.
Image doesn't really do it justice, but that fur coat was rather incredible. You were talking about Adrian's costume.
Yeah. That further, all the scenes of her running across the lobby, running back across. That one scene, she's actually runs into the revolving door and comes back around out of the revolving door again. Let's see what the next one is. Oh, of course, this is what a slimy guy, try to make his move on her. Next. Yeah, so this was quite extraordinary, of course, the death of the Baron, because it's so sudden, it's so shocking, here we are in this somewhat white comedic, story, and all of a sudden, one of our best loved characters is killed, and without any real, expectation that was going to happen, right? And of course, we don't see it. Barely, we never see the dead body. It's not done for any gratuitous or sensationalistic way, but it somehow does become a commentary of sort of this, this fickle fate of life where things happen and we don't know when they're going to happen and what's going to happen, and again, I don't think. The general is a horrible human being, and I don't think he necessarily even intentionally tried to kill him, but the consequence of that moment and what it does for the film in terms of shifting the tension is quite extraordinary. I think the whole movie moves into a different gear after this murder. Next. Yeah, and this is again, this set of the and this was, after people are hearing, oh, a murder, oh, there's, call the police, there's a murder. But look at the great lighting here too. Next. Yeah, so, this is, you killed someone over a pocketbook, and the fact that, Kringlen can stand up to this boss, remember this was his big boss, and quite an extraordinary display of human spirit, and as much as she's trying to be cajoled and bought out and everything else, none of that's going to happen because he's a man with integrity and a man of, of great belief. And of course, his friend, the Baron, the only human being who's ever been really nice to him, has been murdered, Next, please. And this is that incredible scene where Garbo calls Barrymore, in his room at 3 a.m., not knowing he's been killed. In fact, we cut to the dog lying on the bed, which I think is very humorous, listening to the phone call. And she starts to, make love to the phone. She starts to, with her endearments and her passion and her love. And oh my gosh, the tragedy and the irony, of course, the audience way ahead, knowing that he's dead, and having to listen to, what any man would want, this gorgeous woman just fallen madly in love with him. It's just fantastic. Look at the light in her eyes. Next. Yeah, and here we go. Tragic tragedy. Both of them love the Baron, but what you move on, right? And they come up with a plan to travel together and to, try to move on and leave this behind. And of course, they're really the only ones with a happy ending, in this film. And I think it just makes us all feel really, really good because they both are, really honestly good people. And even, Flemschen, for all her, I'll have an affair with you and sex, really has a heart and really cares. And I think this was just wonderful. In fact, there's a close-up of Joan Crawford, I think right around here. That's one of my favorite shots of hers in the movie. And right around this period, here she's ordering the tickets for the train. Next.
Just to mention as well, Fred, you were talking earlier about how some of the theaters were taking parts of the movie out. This scene was one of those that was removed in Philadelphia, apparently.
Yeah, because of course, you weren't allowed. First of all, you weren't allowed to have affairs, with married men or even not married men. And worse, you couldn't be a nice, good person and be having affairs. If you were someone who was going to be having sex, you had to be a slut. You couldn't be a nice, honest, wonderful human being. So this would never have happened, once the code really got rolling. And this did get cut out. And several of the scenes with Wallace Beery as well also got cut out. Next. Yeah, so now we're at the end, of course, and they lie to her and they tell her the Baron has already left, and he'll meet her at the station, and there's some sense of tragedy here. I think there are little moments, in fact, towards the end where you see Garbo start to feel like something's gone or something's missing, something's wrong. It's just her intuition, and of course everybody covers it up and rushes her out and wants her to just keep going, but very, very sad. Next. Okay, so here we go, the end. Anyhow, so love to hear your thoughts and comments. I hope this didn't drone on too long here. I guess I did, but we definitely would want to spend some time talking to you folks. So what do we got, Jeff? Anybody have anything they found interesting in this film?
Yes, from Caroline Hill Smith, who loved the film, found the symbolism for wealth interesting, using fur coats with Greta Garbo having the only full-length fur coat, right, and Joan Crawford never wearing a coat, and some background actors in coats with fur collars. Was this done intentionally, Fred?
Yeah, very, very intentionally. Yeah, in fact, Joan Crawford's wardrobe was a big issue because, it was very dowdy and appropriate to what a stenographer might have been able to afford and wear. And but Crawford wasn't very happy about that. She wanted to look glamorous and wonderful. But again, this was some of the level of attention to detail where I think it was done quite effectively and appropriately, and was it in that way a statement in terms of the different classes that people come from and what they represent. And you can just sort of, just simply look at them and immediately get an understanding of where they fit into the whole, pecking order, right? So great question, but I think it was very intentionally done.
Jeff Duncanson has a mention of Jean Herschel, who has a
role. Yeah.
You mentioned Reed earlier, who he was also in that. Did you want to say a couple of words about Jean?
Well, I the truth is I don't know that much about Jean Herschel, but he played the the head bell captain, or what was his role? But I forget, Jeff, why? Because there's the Jean Herschel Award, which is given by the Academy for humanitarian purposes, and why is it named after him?
Well, he was a Dutch actor, prominent in the silent era, as you mentioned previously, and he had a lot of humanitarian causes himself. Very well liked amongst the community, and he died at a reasonably young age as well.
Yeah. So of course, if you recall, he's the staff member who gets the phone call because his wife is at the hospital, and we don't know what it does. And but she's going to give birth, and then of course, towards the end, the baby is born. Obviously not born at the hotel, but in a sense, a statement towards the, the ongoing cycle of life, so.
Karen Charters, these are more comments, but favorite movie ever. So glad we.
Oh, wonderful. Yay.
And always thought it was a real hotel. So there you are. Some revelation.
A real hotel.
She always thought it was a real hotel.
Yeah. Yeah. No, Hollywood was, nothing was real. They built it all.
Let's see here. From Jeffrey Eden, is the photo of the cast and crew shooting the scene publicly available? It's a great shot. It is publicly available. And Jeffrey, Garbo actually agreed to let in publicity photos and production shots readily. So there are a lot of production stills.
And there's a lot, by the way, you can find on YouTube the premiere of the movie. And you can see wonderful shots of all these actors arriving at the premiere and all dressed up and glamour. And so there's a lot of stuff online on YouTube around images and video too, or film, of this period and of this movie, because it was such a major film at the time, and in fact throughout Hollywood history. Yeah.
They even had this funny gimmick when people would show up at the theater for the premiere, where they had to sign in as if they were signing into a hotel. It was very peculiar.
Oh yeah, Hollywood's always coming up with wonderful gimmicky things, and premieres were a big deal in those days. Not they still are, but not quite the same. Remember these grand palaces. 2,500, 3,000 people were coming to a single screen, to watch these films. And so everybody was dressed in huge parties, and it was a big deal.
Shannon Kyles asks, what happened to the set artifacts, the railings, the lights? Were they used in other films?
That's a great point. And the answer is yes. Often the sets were saved and pieces were saved and reused. And in fact, you can often see sets that were used in a film repurposed, never looking exactly the same. One of the most famous, of course, is in Citizen Kane, where Orson Welles was running out of money, and when it came time to do Xanadu, he got a staircase from one film and another fireplace from another film, and cobbled together a set with reused pieces. So certainly a lot, would have been thrown out too. But because again, the studio was making, they were making 30, 40 films a year. So, they, obviously wanted to, and props, and wardrobe, they had huge wardrobe departments, so it was all very effectively and efficiently done. Much more effectively and efficiently than now. Now, huge sets, and people just throw them in the garbage because who knows when another movie's going to get made. And studio doesn't own the movie and they don't own the set anyhow. They're just distributing it. So it's completely different.
Well, Michelle Harris has a comment and a question. Number one, she was rather shocked that Greta Garbo was only 26. They thought she was in her middle age. And I don't know if that's due to lighting or black and white effect or not, but I often hear that from people, that they think the actors are much older than they really are.
Yeah, that I've heard that too, often from silent films. I'm not sure why. Maybe it was some of the sophistication as well, but it could have been the lighting. But and remember, she wasn't an ingenue. She had been acting for for 10 years, or at least been a big movie star for 7 or 8 years. But they were sophisticated, and maybe that was part of it. Though the eyebrows and. But it's interesting. I hadn't really thought about that, but yeah. But she was 26, 27 when they shot that. And Crawford the same. In fact, Crawford looks younger than her. I was surprised to hear that they were so close in age when they shot this film. But again, I think it's how she was dressed, how the makeup was done, the nature of her performance.
Well, we have a couple of individuals. We've got Michelle Harris and Muriel and John McKay are talking about having a Louisiana flip. Do you know what's in it, Fred?
Oh, shoot. Oh, I wrote it down.
People on social media on this one, possibly.
It's I can't remember now.
I believe there's a splash of orange blossom in it, but there is a recipe online for it. I will find out somehow.
There absolutely is. I saw it, and it's quite famous, as a matter of fact. And I believe that it actually was created in Germany, like that was in the play and in the original material.
Also, did you happen to notice that though they're on the 5th floor, all the rooms seem to be labeled, 107, 108. Any thoughts on that one?
I don't know. Yeah, they obviously are up high, off why they're in the hundreds. great question. I never noticed that.
Oh, and thank you, Margarita. She always comes through. Rum, orange juice, raw egg. She looked it up yesterday. Thank you.
Okay.
I have a quick question for you, Fred, before we wrap up this evening.
Sure.
Do you have any fond memories of attending the Oscars? Since this is all about
I got some good Oscar stories. I'll tell you one. I'll tell you the shortest version I can.
All right.
So the first Oscar ceremony I ever went to was for The Godfather 3. And we were nominated 7 times. We had 7 nominations for The Godfather Part 3. And my wife and I were going to leave that morning from San Francisco. We lived up in San Francisco, and get there in plenty of time, go to the hotel, get, our tuxedo. And so anyhow, we get to the airport, our plane's canceled. The next plane's canceled. We finally get on a plane, but at that point, we were going to get there so late, we had to have the limo meet us at the airport, right? It just goes straight there. There wasn't time to go to the hotel and change. So we had to get changed in the bathroom. So, my wife's putting on her gown and her makeup and asking, some homeless, what do you think? Anyhow, we get in the car and our car number is 777. So we think, well, that's great luck. And with 7 nominations, this is going to be a great night. So we get there and we start losing. In fact, we lost all 7. We didn't win 1 Academy Award. And during the commercial breaks, you're allowed to go out into the lobby where they have, cocktails and, and stuff like that. And so, I'm going out to the lobby and we lost. Anyhow, by the time we got to the party afterwards, I wound up getting so sick. I was out in the alley, throwing up. That was my wonderful first experience of the Academy Awards. But I did go other times as well, and some were better than others. But nothing. I mean, I was 32 or 33. And then my other experience, of course, was my second job in Hollywood was working on the Academy Awards. This was in 1976. And I was backstage. I was what they call a gopher or production assistant. And I was, just running around helping people. And then sometimes you had to go sit in the seats, right? Because if a star was out in the lobby, they couldn't have an empty seat on camera. So, they had people like me who would sit in the seats for 15 minutes until the star came back and took their seat. And so that was actually one of my very first experiences with Hollywood. And I got to see a lot and hear a lot. And so, I've always had very fond memories of the Academy Awards.
Well, if everyone comes back for next week, which is The Lost Weekend,
so a couple of things about this movie, The Lost Weekend, because if you haven't seen it and you've heard Billy Wilder was the writer and director, you might be expecting some kind of wonderful comedy, like Some Like It Hot or some. This is not that. This is quite a dark movie, and it's a movie about alcoholism. And inspired perhaps by his experience with the screenwriter Raymond Chandler the year before doing Double Indemnity. But it's quite a beautifully, if you think of The Apartment, for example, that Billy Wilder with Jack Lemmon and Shirley MacLaine, it's more on that kind of tone, but it's a very challenging movie. And it won Best Picture, and I haven't seen it for probably 20 years. So I'm really looking forward to watching it and seeing what it's like today. And again, it was highly celebrated at its time. So please join us if you can. By the way, the theaters, things are starting to really go well at the theater, just in terms of some private rentals. We have a film shoot next week. We are really hoping we'll all move into the orange zone and have, the 50 people. Again, you can rent the theater, for 10 people if you want. Go to the Westdale. We have other film clubs going on. So, lots of stuff going on. Your support is always much appreciated. Donations, whatever you can do. And I hope you enjoyed the talk, and look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you again, Jeff, for all your help with the slides and questions.
All right. Have a great weekend, everybody. Take care.
Bye, everybody.